Chapter 21 of the Sheridan Road Mystery. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Sheridan Road Mystery by Paul and Mabel Thorne. Chapter 21. The Chimney That Wouldn't Draw. Marsh stood for a moment in puzzled thought. Then he heard a cheerful voice say, "I been got him all right," and he recognized his rescuer. "Hold him for a minute," ordered Marsh, and he leaped over the pine to the car, returning immediately with one of the robes. With Neil's assistance, Marsh wound the robe around the upper part of the man's body, fastening his arms to his side as effectively as if he had been placed in a straitjacket. Then he took the man's belt and secured his feet in the same way he had tied up those of the other man. Marsh next took the men's handkerchiefs and two of his own. Stuffing one into each man's mouth and tying another around his head, Marsh effectually gagged them into silence. "Now," he said to Niels, "we'll lay these two fellows out of sight in the underbrush." When this was accomplished he instructed Niels to follow him, and they cautiously approached the house. As they crossed the lawn, Marsh heard rapid footsteps ahead, followed by the opening of the house door. He immediately dashed in pursuit. In the hall he paused to listen for sounds that would indicate the direction the man had taken. He heard the clicking of a telephone receiver hook and a voice calling, "Hello, hello!" Leaping through an arched curtained doorway at his left, Marsh discovered a dim light in a connecting room, and darted to the doorway, drawing his automatic and transferring it to his right hand as he ran. He found himself in the library of the house, and in one corner he saw the driver of the car with a telephone in his hands. "Drop that phone," called Marsh, leveling his automatic. Ignoring Marsh's command, the man hastily gave a number to the operator. It was quite clear what was happening. This man, returning from his fruitless quest at the station, had witnessed the capture of his companions. He was now endeavoring to warn some person, probably the principal, who was the man Marsh particularly wanted. There was no time for argument, so Marsh fired. The man dropped the telephone and stumbled forward in a heap on the floor. Marsh dashed across the room and replaced the receiver on its hook, hoping that the connection had not been made in time for the man at the other end of the wire to hear the shot. Though the man had fallen, Marsh knew that he had nothing worse than a flesh wound in the arm, because he was sure of his aim. He tied the man's hands with a handkerchief and his feet with his belt, and left him on the floor. Turning quickly to Niels, who had followed him into the room, and now stood watching, he handed the Swede the captured automatic, saying, "Do you know how to use it?" "Ja, I know," was the smiling reply. "All right," said Marsh. "I'm going to search the house. Follow me, and keep your eyes open." Marsh hurried back through the front room to the hall, with the Swede at his heels, and he heard the man murmuring as he went, "You bane fine man." As they climbed the stairs, feeling their way in the dark, they heard a distant hammering. It came from the back of the house, and Marsh and Niels speeded down the hall. The hammering ceased as they approached the door at the end of the hall. A thin strip of light showed beneath it, and Marsh heard familiar voices. "I tell you, somebody's come after us," said one. "Oh, hell! The man said nobody could hear a foghorn here," replied the other. "What's the use?" Marsh found the key in the lock, and turning it, threw the door open. There stood Morgan and Tierney, in the wreckage of what had once manifestly been a beautifully furnished bedroom. A black opening, through which a strong draught came when the door was opened, showed where once had been a shuttered window. The remains of chairs littered the floor. Parts of the bed were scattered around the room, and in the center of the floor was a pile of felt that had once been the stuffing for the mattress. "My God!" cried Marsh. "What has happened?" The two men's faces lighted up at the sight of him, and Tierney shouted, "What'd I tell you, Morgan? I knew that guy would find us." "He bane fine man," added a voice from the doorway. "Hello, Svenska," bellowed Tierney. "Who are you?" Niels grinned as Marsh explained who he was. "How did you get in? Where's the gang?" rapidly questioned Morgan. "One wounded and tied downstairs, and two safely tied up by the gate," explained Marsh. "One of the two out there is your man Wagner. Now tell me how you got here." Morgan gave him a brief outline of their adventures. "But how did the room get in this state?" questioned Marsh. "Well, you know Tierney," replied Morgan with a laugh. "He's a mighty restless individual when you try to shut him up. He demolished all the chairs on the door. We found the window frame and the shutters had been screwed tight to keep us in, so Tierney took the bed apart and used the sides to clean out the whole business. When we discovered it was too far to drop from the window, we tried to make a rope with the ticking of the mattress, but when we tested it, the stuff proved to be too rotten to hold us. And the worst of it," added Morgan, "it was cold enough in here before Tierney broke out the window. Since then we've been freezing. If there's a fire in the house, lead us to it." "I don't think there is," replied Marsh. "Now that you speak of it, I noticed a damp chill in the place the minute I came in. Niels," he added, turning to the Swede, "you're a good fellow. I saw a big open fireplace in the library. Build a wood fire there, and we'll warm my friends up." Niels nodded and started off. "We haven't any time to lose," announced Marsh, turning back to Morgan. "I expect to find my final evidence in this house, and we've got to get back to town pretty soon. You fellows can warm up a bit, and then we'll start a systematic search from the garret to the cellar." All three went down to the library, where Niels was building the fire. Tierney loudly voiced his approval as the red and yellow flames began to creep over the wood. A minute later, however, he was choking and swearing as the acrid wood smoke rolled out into the room instead of up the chimney. "I'll fix him," explained Niels. "Chimney cover to keep out draft, maybe." He hurried out of the room. A few minutes later he returned with a white face and staring eyes. "You, come," he half whispered from the doorway. "I see something." "What is it?" questioned Marsh. "I don't know. I only think. Come, quick." "Go ahead," said Marsh. "We'll follow." And with Niels leading the way, they all climbed the stairs. Niels had turned on the electric lights in the halls. They could now see their way clearly as he guided them to the attic and across it to an open window which opened on a wide gutter. They crawled out after him and worked their way along a short distance to the big old-fashioned outside stone chimney from the library fireplace. "Just put your hand in, so," directed Niels, making a motion with his arm. Marsh reached up and followed the suggestion. Just below the top of the chimney, his fingers came into contact with a human head. "My God!" he cried. "Here's our man!" "Holy saints!" gasped Tierney. Then Morgan asked, "What do you mean?" "I think we have found Merton's body," replied Marsh. "You'll have to help me get him out." With considerable effort and hindered by the blackness of the night, Marsh and Morgan climbed the slanting, slate-covered roof and perched themselves on the broad capstone of the chimney. Slowly they loosened the wedged-in body, gradually drew it out through the top of the chimney, and passed it down to Tierney and Niels, who crept with it along the gutter and passed it through the attic window. Marsh and Morgan followed them, and under the glow of the one dim electric light, the two men made a hasty examination of the body. It was in a fair state of preservation, due probably to the cold air, which had been made especially effective by the draught through the chimney. The identification was made certain when Marsh extracted a card case from the man's coat, in which they found the business and personal cards of Richard Townsend Merton, and Morgan located the duplicate of the cuff button he had discovered in the empty apartment. The examination completed, Marsh turned to Morgan. "Did you notice that this man was stabbed, not shot?" he asked. "Yes," returned Morgan. "That was one of the things I looked to make certain of." "Now," said Marsh, addressing the two detectives, "I guess this job has warmed you fellows up. We can't lose another minute. You, Tierney, make a careful examination of this attic. It should not take you long, and then you can join Morgan, who will start now to make an examination of the second and third floors. Niels and I will look over the first floor and the basement. You join us as soon as you get through. If you find anything worthwhile, bring it down." Leaving Tierney in the attic and dropping Morgan off at the third floor, Marsh and Niels passed on down to the first floor of the house. A careful inspection of this floor brought nothing of especial interest to light, except that there were no signs of its having been used. The kitchen and the pantry were bare of food, and Marsh could see that neither of the sinks in the pantry and the kitchen nor the kitchen stove had been used for a long time. "I thought you said those men were living in the house?" he queried, turning to Niels. "So I tank," Niels assured him. "Queer," murmured Marsh. "No fire, no food, and no signs of cooking." "Maybe in basement," suggested Niels. "Well, we're going there now," said Marsh. "Do you know the way, Niels?" "I guess," replied the Swede, leading the way into a long hall that led from the pantry along one side of the house. A short distance up this hall Niels opened a door, and they discovered a stairway leading into the basement. Marsh lit a match and located an electric switch. When he turned this, a light flashed on below, and they descended the stairs. Here they found a hall leading across the house, with a doorway at the far end and one on either side. "I tank," said Niels, pointing down the hall. "That door go outside, this one to laundry. That one I don't know." Marsh opened the last door indicated by Niels, and lighting another match, found it a rough basement containing the heating plant, coal bins, and general storage space. He found the electric light and turned it on. but little coal was left in the bins, and the thick mantle of dust over the other things in this part of the basement showed that it had been a long time since anything had been touched. The last thing, Marsh looked into the firebox under the heating plant. This was well filled with an ash that had resulted from the burning of papers, but after poking around with a long stick, he found nothing remained which could in any way be used as evidence. Turning out the light, they crossed the hall and opened the other door. With a match, Marsh found a wall switch close to the door, and snapping this, the room was flooded with brilliant light from several electric lamps pendant from the ceiling, each covered with a green metal shade. Here was the solution of the deserted condition of the upper part of the house. That part of the house had been left intentionally deserted, for all the men's activities had been centered in this room. It was a large, square room that had been the laundry of the house. 4 cots, standing along one wall, indicated where the men had slept, and several pots on the gas stove showed where they had obtained their heat and done their cooking. Through the glass door of a cupboard in one corner he saw cans and packages of food. The table in the center of the room was littered with soiled dishes and the remains of a meal. Large patches of black cloth on 2 sides of the room marked the probable location of windows which had been carefully covered to keep any light from showing on the outside. But what interested Marsh most was the complete counterfeiting equipment in one corner of the room. A small trunk also stood in this corner, and raising the lid, Marsh discovered a large quantity of the $5 bills he had been tracing over the country for the last 2 years. What he really sought, however, were the plates, and these were apparently missing. At this moment Niels spoke. "You like see dis?" he asked. Turning, Marsh found that Niels had the cupboard door open, and was pointing to a suitcase which lay on the floor. It had been previously concealed by the lower part of the door. "You bet I would!" exclaimed Marsh, and hurried across to the cupboard. He pulled out the suitcase, which was fairly heavy, and tried to open it. It was locked. Niels pulled out a big knife with a long blade, and began to cut through the leather at the edges. He presently laid back one side of the suitcase, exposing some clothing to view. It was only a thin layer, however, which Marsh threw quickly aside. Under the clothing he found a carefully wrapped package. Tearing off the covering, he saw what he sought, the plates for the $5 bills. Beneath the package, laid out in a carefully arranged row, were bundles of stocks and bonds. Here at last was the evidence Marsh had sought, and the confirmation of the theory he had carefully worked out. End of chapter 21.